here in November, we did a presentation on James Lenox Dutton. You may remember him. He's got the best of the tombs inside the church. And tonight we're going to talk about his son who inherits the estate and then is raised to the peerage. So, First Lord Sherborne, in many years after he inherits this estate, he will be raised to the peerage. And his father was James Lenox Napier Dutton, who we talked about last time. His father was born in Ireland and quite unexpectedly at the last minute becomes his uncle's heir. And so he holds vast estates in Ireland and vast estates here. So we want to talk about his life before he inherits. He inherits in a year that Americans remember, 1776, is when he inherited these estates. His mother dies in June, his father dies in August, right in between what's going on in America. And he has a name similar to his father. It's James, but without the Lenox, Napier Dutton. His father was born Napier. Sometimes it has an I in it, and sometimes it doesn't. And so, we'll go to the next slide. And remember his father. These are the portraits of his father that the National Trust owns. And he held this estate, and this is his monument in the church. It is this beautiful, beautiful angel standing on deck, right? Looking up at it. So I'm going to talk about this man's family. One of his sons is the man we're focusing on tonight. So here's the genealogical chart. James Napier Lenox Dutton. He was the man who was born in Ireland. He was the nephew of the previous owner, Sir John Dutton, and his uncle didn't have any children, and so they struggled to which nephew to leave it to, and they eventually leave it to him. He was married twice, and with his first wife he has John Lenox Dutton. And then with his second wife, all in blue, he has a whole other family. James, William, and Ralph, Rafe, Anne, Mary, Francis, and Jane. And so I'm going to talk to you about his early childhood as these children are born. We don't actually know the year, that John Lenox Dutton is born, but we think he's born in Ireland. You know, it's really hard to find the records in Ireland because there was this little war, you might have heard about it, in 1920. And the Irish Record Office was set ablaze. It's very hard to find records going back in Irish history. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see James, here he is in the Sherborne Parish records. He's being born here at Sherborne in 1744. He is the eldest child of his second wife, Jane Bond. I hope her dad's name is James Bond, but I don't know that for sure. But anyway, Jane, his wife, and this is their eldest son. And then they have Jane. She is born in 1746 and then buried. And there's going to be a lot of trauma when he's an infant, when he's a toddler. They're going to lose several children in a row. But they will reuse the name Jane, which is not uncommon. I know that you lose a lot of children in this era, but I think the grief is still not less just because it's a frequent thing. And so if we go to the next screen, Jemima, daughter, she's baptized and then she's buried a few months later. This is very traumatic on his parents, the loss of these children. And then we see William. He is baptized, and he is going to ultimately become the second surviving son. He will not have the name of Dutton. He will keep Napier, and he will inherit the estates in Ireland. He, in our future, if we fast forward, he's going to marry the daughter of Lower Slaughter, the vicar of Lower Slaughter. Okay? And then Mary, she is in the parish records. She's baptized, and in our future she will marry Thomas Master in Cirencester. And then Thomas, he is baptized and he's buried 2 days later. I just think it's very difficult to lose this many children. Frances, she is born, and later she will marry an Irish landholder. And then Rafe or Ralph, he is baptized in 1755, and he is very close with Thomas Cookwell, who will be his brother-in-law. And then he'll die without heirs. So there's Jane, the youngest sister, is not in the parish records. You know, they reuse the name Jane. So there's another sister out there. I don't know where she's born. I'm going to have to figure that out. But it doesn't appear that she's born in Sherborne. So we know that his father and his mother is James Bond from Newland here in Gloucestershire area. That he will go to Eton as a young man, and then he will go to Christ Church, Oxford in 1763. Kind of a predictable path for a future landholder. And so then he goes to Eton, and we know from the Gloucester Record Office documents that his father sends little gifts to the headmaster, and that he sends his next son, William, to Eton as well. And then he goes to Christ Church. At the age of 18 is when he matriculates in. He doesn't seem to have earned a degree, but that's not uncommon. He probably would have hung out with a lot of clerical folks, those that are going to go into the clergy roles here. But he'll know a lot of people from Christ Church, Oxford. Then what's the next significant event in his life? Well, in 1769, his sister Mary will, as a very young woman, marry into one of the oldest politically active families, the Master family. And so she marries Thomas Master. And you may have been to Cirencester before and seen the Abbey and walked around the park, and this used to be their park. And her house, Thomas Master's house, used to stand right here. But it's a nursing home, right? This is what it looked like in the old days. In the same spot, this was the Abbey house that was torn down in the 1960s. And so Thomas Master lived there. So this is our guy, our James Dutton, First Lord Sherborne's sister, is going to be allied with this house. And that's going to help him politically because he's on the right side of the politics that are coming up. And then they own, to get into their estate, you have to go through this Norman gate, isn't that nice? And then this is what it used to look like in the old days to the Abbey estates, and they're pretty close by. And that still stands, although there's a very fast-moving road in front of it now, you might not notice it. The Master family also owns Knoll Park, but that part of their inheritance is entail male. So unless Thomas Master has a son, that part won't go to his daughters. And then our Mary, who's the sister of First Lord Sherborne, is one of the last people buried inside the Abbey. And here's her tombstone that looks like it should be outdoors, but it's indoors. And it talks about her life, and so you might just stop that in there. Now, they are going to have, this is kind of fast-forwarding a little bit, but the Masters are going to have 2 daughters. And one of them is Jane Master, and last summer we cleared off her grave and talked to her a little bit. She is in all my research. She's kind of the middle of the wheel of the spin. She keeps showing up in all my research. And she's an heiress. She never marries. And she's buried about that many inches away from the Earl Bathurst graves. And then she has a sister named Mary Ann Carteret, who becomes Lady John Thynne. She will be the lady-in-waiting to Princess Charlotte, who dies in childbirth. She's the Prince Regent's only child, the heir to the throne, and it was a huge tragedy when she died and the baby died. She's one of the 4 people who witnessed this terrible childbirth. And that's why all George III's sons had to get married real quick, including the Duke of Kent, to produce Victoria, because they had no more legitimate heirs. But she's somebody I'd like to talk about in the future. She has a fascinating life. And then, all of a sudden, he becomes the heir of his father. He has this older brother. His father was married, had a first wife in Ireland. The first wife died, and this man's name was John Lenox Dutton. And he dies. Let's talk about his death, because it's a little peculiar. There he is over there, just as a reminder. He's the oldest from the first wife. And let's look at his death. Here we have the Oxford Journal reporting his death. It's 1771. And it says he's died in Maidenhead, Berkshire. That's kind of strange, because the heirs around here usually don't go far from home. They usually just go to Bybury, right? And live there. And he's a gentleman possessed of a large paternal estate, but it doesn't mention what estate. It doesn't put Lenox in the middle. It doesn't give us a middle name, which would have given away who he was. And it devolves upon his brother, but it doesn't say who his brother is. Very strange. It gets stranger. I can't figure out exactly the name of this house, but the description of it is on several documents. It's a long story. It's not naming it. And this is in the thicket in Maidenhead. I believe he lived there. And here, the Gentleman's Magazine reports obituaries, and somebody of this great of stature, an heir to this great estate, would usually have several paragraphs on what a tragedy it is and what he'd accomplished and stuff. Nope. It's just John. Oh yeah, we got a John Dutton Esquire died. Not his age, not who he's related to, nothing. Very odd indeed. Well, the will is then probated, and do you know what? He does not leave one thing to a family member. Nothing. He leaves some, they say, to the Reverend Mr. Rice, his tutor. He gets everything, pretty much everything, except he's giving 300 pounds to a housekeeper and 150 pounds to a farmer. That's the only 3 gifts in his whole will. So I looked up the will to make sure. You can buy it online on the National Archives at Kew. And sure enough, those things are true. The woman's name is Elizabeth Hammond. He gives her all the household goods, furniture, carriages, house, plate, china, except a saddle horse. And I don't know, if this is a mistress, I don't know. He gives another annuity, these are annuities, to a farmer. They have 3 witnesses to the will that says, yes, this is his signature, I believe this is his will. None of them are family members. There's only one executor, and it is Reverend Rice. Richard Rice. Where in the world did Richard Rice come into the story? So you have to look into who he is. Oh, and Richard Rice gets his inheritance from Ireland. He's got some estates in Ireland that he gets too. Who is this guy? Well, look him up on the Anglican Clergyman database and look where he is. He's been in Lower Slaughter, he's been the curate at Morton-on-the-Water, he's been at Windrush and Sherborne, at Upper Slaughter, and just a few months before his death, he moved to Quennington. So he's clearly been around. That's how he knows it. He's been in this area. And this man gets 35,000 pounds plus all his land. This is an enormous sum of money in those days. An enormous sum of money. I do not know, unfortunately, what this relationship is like. What the purpose of the relationship is. If it's, oh, we got a computer freeze. Just a second. Sorry. That's okay. So on the next screen is a big question mark that says, I don't know why he gave it all to me. I don't know if he's clearly estranged from his family. Let's see if we can go backwards now. Okay, well, hold on. He's clearly estranged from his family, but I don't know if there's another type of relationship with this Reverend Rice or not. There are almost no personal letters in Lord Sherborne's family that exist in the archives from this era. There's a few, but they're more, not personal, they're more business related. Sometimes there's gossipy about the next lawsuit I'll tell you about. The next event that occurs in his life, now that he's the heir, he is his father's heir. Now he just won't be getting the Irish estates, he'll be getting the main estates here in Gloucestershire. And so his prospects for marriage go way up, and in 1774, he marries the eldest daughter of basically in the top 5 richest men in England, outside of our dukes, I think. And his name is Thomas Cook, and his grandfather had been the Earl of Leicester, but then that had died out. And now he has a sister named, Thomas Cook has a sister named Elizabeth Cook. Now you may remember the Zoffany painting that we talked about in November. This is a painting of the family of James Lenox Dutton, and it has his second wife from the Bond family in Newland, Gloucestershire, and then his youngest child is Jane over here, and his eldest child with this wife is our James over there, and there they are together. And James is going now to get to marry this great heiress in the Cook family. The Cook family is going to be on the right side of politics for getting raised to the peerage as well. So in 1774, he marries Elizabeth Cook. And let's see if the computer will cooperate. It will not cooperate. Oh, and she was raised at Holcombe Hall in Norfolk, which is still owned by the Earl of Leicester today. It's a massive, beautiful estate. I don't think it's very pretty on the outside, but it is fantastic on the inside. And so she is raised here, and she'll be coming to Sherborne, which will probably be a bit of a step down for her. But she has great political ties. Now, her brother, Thomas Cook, will be offered a peerage 3 times before he'll accept it. He'll eventually accept it. But of course, they have to get married. They have to have a wedding. And so the families will get together, right? And the Duttons will meet, the Cooks, and the marriage. Guess where the marriage is? Where's the fashionable place to get married? London, St. George's, Hanover Square. That's the fashionable place to get married. Are we still locked up? I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. And so Wenham Coke is their father. And so Elizabeth Cook marries our James Dutton. And later then she'll become Lady Sherborne. But at the wedding, they get together and meet, right? And so at the wedding is her brother Thomas Cook, who is our future Earl of Leicester. And he falls in love with Jane Dutton, and they get married. So the next year, we have another marriage in 1775. Jane marries the heir to Holcombe Hall. And this is a love match, and it's a very good alliance. So what is this going to mean for our Dutton family is that we're going to have kids that are double cousins. Does that make sense? Because their mums and their dads are both brothers and sisters. And so that gives us the Duttons a real solid alliance with this very innovative agriculturalist in Norfolk. And I drove there once to go, they have an archive and they have an archivist. It's 54 roundabouts between Sherborne and Holcombe Hall. And for a Texan, that is a huge stressful thing. I'll just let you know. And you can see this estate is quite large and extensive and in very good condition today in private hands. And they have an archivist, which I like. And the interior is fabulous. And they use it for movie sets, and our Jane has a lot to do with the decoration of the interior there. So our Jane, meaning Jane Dutton, will go and marry, and she will only have 3 daughters with the future Earl of Leicester, which is a shame, because if she'd had a son, then the Duttons would have been very closely allied, double cousins with the future Earl of Leicester. Eventually he accepts the peerage. He gets married to an 18-year-old when he's in his 70s, I believe, and they quickly have some sons. But the first girl is Jane, Viscountess Andover, and she will marry the heir to the earldom of Suffolk, Viscount Andover, Lord Andover, and then he will be tragically killed in a hunting accident, which will be part of our story. Okay? The Zoffany painting, just FYI as a footnote, is eventually sold. Lord Sherborne sold it in 1922 for 8,000 quid. In 2001 it sold for 4 million quid. Too bad. This is some of the interior, and Jane Dutton, Jane Cook is responsible for much of the interior of Holcombe. And this is a portrait of her. At Holcombe Hall they have a portrait of her. And this is her, and then the next picture shows you inside. Oh, here's her daughter as well. Theoretically. Fictional daughter. She has 3 daughters, and they all have very interesting lives in and of themselves. And this is Thomas Cook, and then Jane and her 3 daughters. So these are the nieces of Lord Sherborne, and they're the double cousins of 2nd Lord Sherborne and Princess Barontinsky and the Countess of Suffolk and things like that. Okay. All right. There is a monument at a local church in Norfolk to Jane Dutton Cook. Jane Cook May Dutton. And that is her monument there. Okay, and so, I think we'll skip over that. That's probably too much for here. This is the movie The Duchess. And, you know, it's got Keira Knightley in it, so it's pretty good. But it's about Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire, and the interior is all of Holcombe Hall. So if you'll watch that, you'll have a love for not only Keira Knightley, but the beautiful part of Norfolk, of Holcombe Hall. So these things have happened to him. He has a good local county alliance in Gloucestershire. Then he's married the eldest daughter of one of the richest men in the kingdom, Thomas Cook. And then his sister married the heir to that estate. Then his mother dies. And this is in June. And then a few months later, his father dies. And this is right under the angel's wing in the church. You may not even notice it because the church monument is so interesting. But if tucked in there is a silhouette, a bust of his mother and father. And at his will, he has an interesting will. He wants to be buried at midnight in the family vault, attended only by servants, nobody else. And he has many things in his will, but at the Duke of Beaufort, he gives him £100 to buy a mourning ring, and that's the tradition. So I might send to my closest friends some money and ask them to buy a ring that you would engrave my name and maybe my death date on it, so you would put it on your finger and you'd remember me by. Shows you he's pretty close to the Duke of Beaufort. Okay, so then he now has inherited the Sherborne estates, and the year is 1776. He doesn't have a title of any sort, but his great uncle had. And he gets very involved in politics. And so let's just look at the things he inherits. Because there's so many, I thought I'd just let them scroll. But wait, there's more. This does not include the Irish estates. That's because most of the Irish estates go to the second and third sons that survive. But wait, that does not include his mom, what his mom gives him. And this is, these are farms around Newlyn area. And so he is a great, oh, can you go back one, does that work? See if that, well, it may not roll, but there's about 8 farms in here that he inherits around the Newlyn area. Okay, all right, so next thing we want to talk about, he has become the owner of this great estate. And one thing he has to deal with is a lawsuit. I'm sorry, I have these turned around. This is something I forgot to correct. The plaintiff should go first. He is going to be suing his supposed nephew, is that right? Cousin, his supposed cousin. And so let me show you a genealogical chart, and this is a legal dispute. This is his father, James Lenox Napier Dutton, who we talked about in November. And then this is his father's brother, General William Napier, who died in 1773. And in 1773, at his death, a woman appeared and said, I'm his legal wife, I'm taking possession of his house, I have a 10-year-old son with him. And then Dutton ejected her physically, and then she sued and got back in, and lawsuits started. And these lawsuits go on for almost 30 years. Now that his father is dead, James is going to have to pick up the cause. And so let me show you some of the details of this lawsuit. One thing other about these Irish estates. These Irish estates descend upon William and Rafe, but those estates should go to him. Does that make sense? That's how that's supposed to go. So he's taking up the cause. Eventually, Rafe will die without any heirs, and those will revert to him. William, who marries Lower Slaughter's vicar's daughter, they have lots of children, and it goes down at La Crue even today. So here we have some details about General William Napier. In 1760, the court records later in the 1770s say, oh, she says at the later end of that year or the beginning of the next, she couldn't quite remember when they got married. And her name sometimes is Anne Fitzgerald, but sometimes her name is Anne Galloway. She seems to be kind of a follower of the army. He's in Germany in the 7 Years' War. That's where he's deployed, and he meets this woman. After the war is over, they come back to Ireland and they cohabitate together. Nobody disputes that. But in 1764, a son is born to them, and she claims from the hour of his birth, publicly and uniformly, he treated and acknowledged this child as his only and legitimate son and the heir apparent of all his estates. Well, this is news to the Duttons. They've never heard of her. She says that he wrote a will, and at the will he gave all that he had to his son. She got half of the estate for life. But then, as soon as he died, ruffians broke into her house, stole all of her documents, every paper and article of value, so she has nothing to prove it with. Mr. Dutton took possession, that's our James, and sued and got temporary possession of the house in Dublin. Then Anne dies. And then there is a writ of ejectment. You have to file it in Ireland to try to get the 10-year-old, now he's probably older than that, boy out. Okay? Lawsuits continued to ensue. Some more testimony at the trial. They tried to hurt her reputation. They said, yeah, he kept a mistress, and she was the woman of the most violent temper, strong passions, and much addicted to intoxication. Yeah? Some other witnesses said, yeah, sometime before 1762 we witnessed the marriage. And there's a letter in the Gloucester Record Office that says they're keeping those witnesses on retainer and paying them in Ireland year after year after year. The name, the person, the connection of the officiating clergyman were unknown to them. Everybody wants to know the name of the clergyman, see if they can find the document. And they said, kind of like we might say at common law, well, everybody treated them like they were married in Ireland. And so what happens in 1775, and 1780, and 1782, either our James or his father files a writ of ejectment at different courts in Ireland and loses them. Now the court's opinion is there's no proof of this marriage, they're not lawfully begotten child, it's not a lawful marriage, but the juries always rule against the absentee landlord in England. And so there is that tension. Over and over again it happens. And then in 1782, our James featured Lord Sherborne gets those two witnesses tried for lying under oath for perjury and thinks, I've got it now, I've got it now. But no matter what he does, he loses when it goes to the jury. And so in 1788, the fourth time it goes to trial, he loses again. The jury's verdict again is against the opinion of the court, and the court says this is only a reputation of a marriage, that's not enough to prove a marriage. And so he is so frustrated and angry, and he's hoping in 1800 when the Union comes together, the Act of Union, Ireland coming into the Union, that maybe these lawsuits will have to be prosecuted in England, maybe he can win them. And then in 1790, by that time he is a peer, so he sits in the House of Lords and he thinks, I'll just get the House of Lords, which is then the Supreme Court of this country, I'll just get them to make a writ of error, they'll just declare it, and he gets that vote. And he gets a retrial and loses in the jury again. And he, by that time, he's in the House of Lords, he has spent 40,000 quid prosecuting that lawsuit and loses it. Wow. All right, so that didn't go, this is the 1790, you can find these in the court cases from 1790, he loses it. He spent 40,000 quid on it and loses those estates in Ireland. Not all of them, but he loses what he thought that his uncle had, his great uncle at this point, had, they'd never heard of the woman, they thought she was a charlatan. Okay. So, despite the courts having 5 trials and 5 times the legal decision is that there was a marriage in 1835 and in 1977, they still, in the peerage books, have him as unmarried. So I guess they had the last word, right? I don't think that that's going to go over in reality, though. He's very political, he's very social. Our James Dutton has a racing course over at Byberry. Yeah? I've been over there once trying to look for where it had existed, and even the Prince of Wales comes to race. You know, he likes to gamble. We've heard about who will be the Prince Regent, the future George IV, comes and socializes with the Duttons here. And then in 1781, he enters, excuse me, that's a typo, that should be a 7, my apologies. In 1781, he enters politics and he runs for a seat in Parliament. And this is Westminster before the big fire in the 1830s. So Parliament looks a little different than it does today. Actually, it looks a lot better today than it did originally. And so let me give you a little bit of background on the basics of what politics are like in Gloucestershire. We have 2 rival noblemen who for decades